Zekthor had seen war across 100 worlds. His purple skin bore the scars of 50 campaigns, each mark a story of victory for the Vacrian Empire. He was a warrior, born and trained, shaped by discipline and honor. Fear was something he had conquered long ago through meditation and rigid training. When battle came, his mind stayed cold and clear like ice. But now he stood in the hangar bay of a human warship called the Defiant, and nothing made sense. The humans were loud. They laughed and shouted to each other while checking their weapons. One soldier played music from a small device, and others moved their heads to the rhythm. Another group gathered around someone who was telling a joke. When the joke ended, they all made loud barking sounds that Zekthor learned was called laughter. This was not how soldiers should behave. A human male approached him. The man was tall by human standards but short compared to Zekthor's 7-foot frame. He wore a uniform with marks that showed he was a commander. His hair was dark, cut very short, and his face showed the lines of someone who had seen combat. "You must be Zekthor," the human said, extending his hand in the strange human greeting ritual. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison. Welcome aboard." Zekthor looked at the offered hand for a moment before gripping it briefly. The human's grip was firm, but his skin was soft compared to Vacrian hide. Fragile, Zekthor thought. "I am here to serve as tactical liaison," Zekthor said in the human language he had learned. "My role is to coordinate between Vacrian and human forces." "Great," Jake said with a smile. "Let me introduce you to some of the team." Jake led him through the hangar. Everywhere Zekthor looked, he saw chaos. Humans touched each other constantly, patting shoulders and backs. They showed emotions openly on their faces. Some looked nervous, others excited. One female soldier near a fighter craft was looking at a small photograph, her eyes wet with tears. "That's Lieutenant Lisa Chen," Jake said, noticing where Zekthor was looking. "She's one of our best pilots." "She is crying," Zekthor observed. "Is she injured?" "No, just missing her family. She does this before every mission." Jake's voice held no judgment, as if this weakness was normal. "And you allow this? A warrior who cannot control her emotions?" Jake stopped walking and turned to face Zekthor. His expression changed, becoming more serious. "Lisa has flown 42 combat missions. She saved more lives than I can count. If crying before a mission helps her get ready, then she can cry all she wants." Zekthor said nothing, but inside he felt certain the humans would fail their first real test. In Vacrian culture, emotions were kept private. Warriors maintained control at all times. To show fear or sadness was shameful. They continued the tour. Jake introduced him to Sergeant Danny Price, a younger male with red hair and too many jokes. Then there was Corporal Amy Walsh, who had decorated her rifle with painted flowers. Medic Karen Phillips wore a necklace with a religious symbol and spoke about praying for everyone's safety. "Your soldiers lack discipline," Zekthor said to Jake when they were alone in the command center. "They form emotional attachments. They show weakness. They will break when real danger comes." Jake was quiet for a moment, looking at the displays showing his crew throughout the ship. "You know, every species we've met has said something similar. You all seem to think we're too soft, too emotional, too attached to each other." "Because you are," Zekthor said simply. "Maybe," Jake admitted. "But we're still here, and we're still fighting. The swarm has been pushing through the galaxy for 3 years now. How many colonies have the Vacrians lost?" Zekthor's face remained neutral, but the question stung. The Vacrians had lost 12 colonies. Each time they had followed proper military doctrine. They had fought with precision and discipline. When the tactical situation became unfavorable, they had conducted orderly retreats to preserve their forces. It was the correct way to wage war. "We fight intelligently," Zekthor said. "We do not waste lives on lost causes." "And how's that working out?" Jake asked. But his tone was not cruel. He genuinely seemed curious about Zekthor's answer. Before Zekthor could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the ship. Red lights began flashing. A voice came over the communication system, urgent but controlled. "All hands to battle stations. Swarm forces detected. Multiple contacts. This is not a drill." The change in the humans was immediate, but not in the way Zekthor expected. They did not panic. The jokes stopped, but the confidence remained. Soldiers moved quickly to their positions, checking weapons and armor with practiced efficiency. The crying pilot, Lisa, wiped her eyes and climbed into her fighter craft with steady hands. Jake turned to Zekthor. "Looks like you'll get to see us in action sooner than expected. The colony world of Theta 7 is under attack. We're part of the response force." "How many swarm ships?" Zekthor asked. Jake checked his display. "Reports are still coming in, but at least 30, maybe more." "And our forces?" 16 ships total, 8 human, 8 Vacrian. The odds were not favorable. Standard Vacrian doctrine would call for reconnaissance and withdrawal if enemy forces exceeded advantage parameters. Zekthor wondered if the humans would finally show their weakness now. When real death came, surely they would break. "We should assess the situation carefully," Zekthor suggested. "Perhaps conduct a tactical evaluation before engaging." Jake was already strapping on his combat armor. He looked at Zekthor with those strange human eyes, green like the plants on his homeworld. "There are 50,000 civilians on Theta 7, Jake said quietly. "If we wait to evaluate, they die. So we don't wait." He left the command center, moving to join his soldiers. Zekthor stood alone for a moment, watching the controlled chaos around him. Humans rushed to their positions, faces set with determination. That female pilot was already launching her fighter. The joke-telling sergeant was leading his squad toward the dropships. Zekthor felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. These humans confused him. They showed fear and love and sadness like children, but they rushed toward battle without hesitation. They were undisciplined but efficient. They were emotional but focused. He followed Jake toward the armory, preparing his own weapons. Soon he would see what humans were truly made of. Soon he would watch them break when the swarm's endless numbers descended upon them. Then the galaxy would understand what Zekthor already knew. Emotion was weakness, and weakness meant death. But a small part of him, a part he did not want to acknowledge, wondered if perhaps he was wrong. The dropship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Theta 7. Zekthor sat strapped into his seat, surrounded by human soldiers. He had insisted on joining the ground forces to observe their combat performance directly. Now he was beginning to question that decision. The humans were singing. It was a battle song, apparently, something about going down in glory and never surrendering. Their voices were rough and off-key, but they sang with passion. Sergeant Danny Price was the loudest, his young face split by a wide smile, even as weapons fire rocked the ship. 30 seconds to landing, the pilot announced over the communication system. The singing stopped. Each soldier checked their neighbor's equipment, a final ritual before combat. Zekthor watched as Danny gripped the shoulder of the soldier next to him, a female named Amy Walsh. "See you on the other side," Danny said. "Don't get dead," Amy replied. Such casual talk about death. Zekthor found it disturbing. The dropship landed hard in the middle of Theta 7's main colony. Buildings burned around them. Civilians ran in every direction, trying to reach evacuation ships. And everywhere, the swarm advanced. The swarm were insect-like creatures, each the size of a human, with blade arms and acidic bite. They moved in perfect coordination, thinking with one shared mind. When one died, the others learned instantly and adapted. They felt no fear, no pain, no doubt. They simply consumed everything in their path. The dropship ramp fell open, and the humans charged out. Zekthor followed, his rifle ready. The battle was immediate and chaotic. Swarm warriors rushed the landing zone from 3 directions. Human soldiers spread out, finding cover and creating firing lines with impressive speed. Their earlier chaos was gone, replaced by something else. Not the cold discipline of Vakrian warriors, but something just as effective in its own way. They fought with intensity that surprised him. Lisa's fighter craft screamed overhead, weapons tearing through swarm positions. Ground forces coordinated with air support smoothly. Danny's squad held the eastern approach, their weapons never stopping. When one soldier's gun overheated, another stepped forward to cover while they switched weapons. Zekthor took his own position, firing with Vakrian precision. Each shot was calculated, efficient. He did not waste ammunition. He maintained situational awareness at all times. This was how warriors fought. But the humans fought differently. They took risks. Amy charged forward to pull a wounded civilian out of the line of fire, exposing herself to enemy weapons. Karen, the medic, treated the injured in the middle of the battle with bullets flying around her. Danny laughed when a swarm warrior nearly killed him, shooting it at the last moment and shouting something about luck. "All forces, this is Commander Morrison," Jake's voice came over the communication system. "Enemy numbers are increasing. Vakrian Fleet Command is ordering tactical withdrawal. All ground forces prepare to evacuate." Zekthor felt relief. Finally, sense prevailed. The enemy outnumbered them 3-1 now, with more arriving every minute. Vakrian doctrine was clear: preserve forces for the next battle. They had bought time for most civilians to evacuate. Now it was time to leave. He began moving toward the extraction point where dropships waited, but the humans were not moving. "Commander Morrison," a Vakrian voice said over the channel, "confirm retreat order received." There was a pause. Zekthor stopped, turning to look at the human soldiers. They had all heard the order. They were checking their ammunition, reloading weapons, but not withdrawing. "Retreat order received," Jake finally responded. "But negative on compliance. We still have civilians in the western sector. Evacuation ships are still loading. If we pull out now, those people die. Commander, you will follow orders and retreat. The tactical situation is untenable." "Copy that," Jake said. His voice was calm, like he was discussing something simple. "We're staying anyway. Morrison out." Zekthor stood frozen. They were disobeying direct orders. They were choosing to stay in an unwinnable battle. This was madness. "You heard the man," Danny shouted to his squad. "We hold the line until every civilian is off this rock. No one gets left behind." The other soldiers responded with shouts of agreement. They did not look afraid. They looked determined, even eager. Zekthor could not understand it. He moved toward Danny. "Sergeant, this is suicide. The swarm numbers are overwhelming. We must withdraw." Danny reloaded his rifle and grinned at him. "Maybe, but those are our people back there. Can't leave them. You will die." "Probably," Danny shrugged. "But that's the job sometimes." He turned back to his firing position and continued shooting. Around him, other humans did the same. They were choosing certain death over retreat. They were choosing strangers over survival. Zekthor should have left. Vakrian forces were already pulling back. His duty was to preserve himself for future battles. Dying here achieved nothing, but he could not move. He watched Amy hold a choke point alone when her entire squad was forced to fall back for ammunition. She stood there, exposed, firing methodically at the endless swarm. She was terrified. Zekthor could see it in her face, in her shaking hands, but she did not run. When her squad returned with fresh ammunition, she was still standing, still firing, still holding. Zekthor watched Danny's unit charge into a swarm nest to rescue trapped civilians. It violated every tactical principle. The nest should have been avoided or destroyed from range, but Danny went in anyway because people needed help. 3 of his soldiers died in that nest. Danny came out carrying a small child, tears running down his face, but still moving forward. Zekthor killed his first swarm warrior, then his second. Then he lost count. He found himself fighting beside the humans, not because orders said to, but because something in him refused to leave them alone. The battle lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of endless combat against impossible odds. The humans never stopped. When ammunition ran low, they used blades. When weapons broke, they used rocks. When comrades fell, they kept fighting in their memory. Finally, the evacuation was complete. Every surviving civilian was off the planet. Jake's voice came over the communication system, rough and tired. All forces, extraction is authorized. Fall back to drop ships. Mission complete. The humans cheered even as they ran. They had won in their minds because they had saved the people. It did not matter that 40% of their forces were dead or wounded. It did not matter that they had disobeyed orders and risked everything. They had saved the civilians, and that was enough. Zekthor collapsed into a seat on the dropship, his body exhausted. Around him, humans treated their wounded, held their dead, and quietly cried. But they also smiled. They touched each other gently, spoke words of comfort, shared what little water they had left. Danny sat next to him, his armor scorched and dented. "You stayed," the sergeant said. "Thanks for that." Zekthor did not know what to say. He had stayed not because of tactics or duty, but because watching them fight alone felt wrong somehow. The dropship lifted off, leaving the burning colony behind. Through the window, Zekthor could see swarm warriors consuming the empty buildings. The colony was lost, but its people lived. The humans called that victory. Zekthor called it waste. So many lives spent for so little gain. It was inefficient, emotional, undisciplined. But as he looked at the relieved faces of the human soldiers, at Danny's tired smile and Amy's quiet pride, Zekthor felt something he had not expected. Doubt. The memorial service took place in the Defiance main gathering hall. Zekthor attended because it was his duty as liaison, but he did not understand the purpose. The dead were gone. Remembering them changed nothing. The hall was filled with human soldiers. They wore dress uniforms, standing in silent rows. At the front of the room, photographs of the fallen were displayed, each face smiling or serious, captured in a moment of life. Below each photo was a name, rank, and age. Zekthor scanned the photos. So young. Many of them. The youngest had been 19 human years old. Just children by Vacrian standards. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the front and spoke about each person who had died. He told stories, shared memories, made the dead feel present again through his words. Some humans cried openly. Others stood with faces like stone, but their eyes were wet. When Jake finished, others came forward to speak. Danny told a funny story about his friend who had died in the swarm nest. The room filled with sad laughter. Amy read a poem. Karen led them in prayer. Zekthor watched it all, feeling like he was observing something alien and strange. Vacrians honored their dead with silence and private meditation. This public display of emotion felt excessive. After the ceremony ended, he found himself standing near the photos. Karen approached him, still wearing her dress uniform. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face was calm. "Did Vacrians have a memorial for their fallen?" she asked gently. "We meditate alone," Zekthor said. "Grief is private." "That sounds lonely," Karen said. The word surprised him. Lonely. He had never thought of it that way. Grief was simply something to process and move beyond. What purpose did sharing it serve? "Why do you do this?" he asked. "Why speak about them, cry for them? They are gone. This changes nothing." Karen looked at the photos for a long moment before answering. "It changes us. When we remember them, we carry them forward. Their sacrifice means something because we make it mean something. Does that make sense?" It did not. But Zekthor nodded anyway. That night, alone in his quarters, Zekthor accessed the human military history database. He needed to understand what he had seen on Theta 7. The battle had disturbed him in ways he could not explain. He started reading, and he could not stop. The records went back thousands of years, battle after battle where humans fought against impossible odds. A place called Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held a passage against thousands. The Alamo, where defenders chose death over surrender. Stalingrad, where humans fought over a single city for months, paying a terrible price, but never yielding. The pattern was clear. Humans did not fight like any other species. When survival instinct said to run, they often chose to stay. When logic demanded surrender, they continued fighting. When every tactical analysis said the battle was lost, humans somehow found ways to win anyway. Or they died trying and called that honorable. Zekthor found himself reading about something called the Chosin Reservoir. Human soldiers surrounded by enemy forces in terrible cold. They fought their way out, carrying their wounded and their dead, refusing to leave anyone behind. Thousands died. But thousands more survived because no one abandoned their companions. It reminded him of Theta 7, the same stubborn refusal to accept the logical choice, the same determination to save others even at terrible cost to themselves. "Interesting reading?" Zekthor looked up. A human stood in his doorway, a male with dark skin and kind eyes. He wore a medical uniform with markings that indicated he was a psychologist. His name tag read, Chris Martinez. "I am researching human military behavior," Zekthor said. "Mind if I come in?" Chris asked. When Zekthor nodded, the human entered and sat down. "You're trying to understand why we fight the way we do." "Yes. Your tactics violate basic principles. You take unnecessary risks. You prioritize emotion over efficiency. Yet somehow you win." Chris smiled. "We're not better warriors than you, if that's what you're thinking. Vakrians are stronger, more disciplined, better trained. On paper, you should win every time. Then why do you succeed?" "Because we're afraid," Chris said simply. Zekthor stared at him. "Fear is weakness. Fear makes soldiers break and run." "For most species, yes," Chris agreed. "Fear is your body's survival mechanism. It tells you when to flee, when to avoid danger. It keeps you alive." He leaned forward. "But humans have learned to override that mechanism. We feel the fear, acknowledge it, and then choose to act anyway. That is irrational." "Completely," Chris said with a laugh. "Humans are terrified all the time. Danny is afraid every single battle. Amy shakes before every mission. Even Jake gets scared, though he hides it well." He paused. "The difference is we've built an entire culture around the idea that being afraid and doing the right thing anyway is the highest form of courage." Zekthor thought about this. "You train yourselves to ignore survival instinct." "Not ignore, override. There's a difference. We acknowledge that we're terrified, that we might die, that every logical part of our brain is screaming at us to run. And then we choose to stay anyway, because some things matter more than our own survival. Like strangers on a colony world." "Exactly." Zekthor was quiet for a long time. "This seems like it would destroy morale. Acknowledging fear should make soldiers weak." "You'd think so," Chris said. "But it actually makes us stronger. When you know everyone else is just as afraid as you are, but staying anyway, it creates bonds. We trust each other more because we know everyone is fighting their own terror just to stand beside us." He stood to leave, then paused. You know what humans call someone who has no fear. We don't call them brave. We call them foolish or crazy. Bravery requires fear. Without fear, there's no courage. After Chris left, Zekthor returned to his research, but now he saw it differently. These were not stories of fearless warriors. These were stories of terrified people who chose to act despite their terror. Days passed. The fleet moved to new positions. Small skirmishes happened, and Zekthor observed the humans carefully. He saw the fear now. It was always there, in shaking hands and tight expressions and whispered prayers. But he also saw them act despite it, every single time. During one engagement, Zekthor was paired directly with Danny's squad. They were securing a supply station when swarm forces attacked in greater numbers than expected. The situation became dangerous quickly. An explosive device landed near Zekthor. He saw it, knew what it was, but his body froze for just a moment. That moment would have killed him. Danny moved faster. The young sergeant dove forward, his armored body covering the device. The explosion came muffled through his armor. Danny flew backward, his armor cracked and leaking atmosphere. Zekthor killed the swarm warrior that had thrown the device, then dragged Danny to cover. The rest of the squad fought to protect them while Karen worked frantically to seal Danny's armor and treat his injuries. "Why did you do that?" Zekthor demanded, his voice harsher than he intended. "You could have died." Danny coughed, blood on his lips, but he smiled. "Couldn't let you die on my watch, buddy. You're part of the squad now." Part of the squad. Zekthor was not human. He was not even an ally by choice but by necessity of war. Yet Danny had risked death for him without hesitation. Later, after Danny was stable and resting in medical bay, Jake found Zekthor in the observation deck. The commander stood beside him, both looking out at the stars. "Danny's going to be okay," Jake said. "He'll be back on duty in a week." "He should not have done that," Zekthor said. "Probably not," Jake agreed. "But that's who he is. That's who we are." "I do not understand you," Zekthor admitted. "You fight recklessly. You risk everything for others. You acknowledge fear, but do not let it control you. Nothing about human behavior makes tactical sense." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what makes sense? Running when you're outnumbered, abandoning positions when they're lost, leaving the wounded when carrying them slows you down." He turned to look at Zekthor. "We could fight that way. It would be more efficient. Lower casualties. Better tactical outcomes." "Then why do you not?" "Because then we wouldn't be human anymore. We'd just be another species trying to survive. Our entire identity is built on the idea that we don't have to choose between survival and doing what's right. We can be terrified and courageous. We can acknowledge that we might lose and fight anyway. That's what makes us human." Zekthor had no response to that. He stood there beside Jake, watching the stars, and felt his entire understanding of warfare shifting in ways he could not quite grasp yet. He had thought humans were weak. Now he suspected they might be something else entirely, something that terrified him far more than the swarm ever could. The alarm woke Zekthor from meditation. Not the standard alert, but the emergency signal that meant immediate danger. He grabbed his weapons and ran toward the command center, his warrior instincts taking over. The corridor was chaos. Human crew members rushed to battle stations. The ship shook with impact. Through the windows, Zekthor saw why. They were surrounded. The Allied fleet had been moving through the Epsilon sector when the trap closed. Swarm ships appeared from everywhere at once, using the debris field and asteroids as cover. It was a coordinated ambush, planned and executed with precision that the swarm rarely showed. "Report!" Jake's voice came over the communication system, calm despite the situation. "Multiple hull breaches, decks 5 through 8, someone replied. "They're boarding us, thousands of them." Zekthor reached the command center. Jake stood at the main display, studying the tactical situation with focused intensity. Around him, human officers worked frantically to coordinate defense. "Status of the fleet?" Jake asked. "Vakrian ships are heavily damaged, so are ours. The swarm has crippled most vessels." The tactical officer's voice was tight. "Sir, they've attached their command ship to our hull. They're using us as a shield." Zekthor understood immediately. The swarm command vessel was connected to the Defiant like a parasite. Other Allied ships could not fire on it without destroying the Defiant as well. It was clever strategy, using their boarding action to create protection. "All hands, prepare for defensive positions," Jake ordered. "Seal blast doors between sections. We fight them deck by deck." "Commander, Vakrian Fleet Command is ordering full evacuation," the communication officer said. "All personnel to escape pods immediately." Zekthor felt relief and fear at the same time. Evacuation was the correct response. The ship was lost, being torn apart from inside. Staying meant certain death. But something in him already knew what Jake would say. "Negative on evacuation," Jake said. He zoomed the tactical display on the swarm command ship attached to their hull. "That command vessel is coordinating the entire ambush. If we can destroy it, the swarm loses coordination and our fleet can escape." "Sir, we cannot destroy it without destroying ourselves," the tactical officer said. "I know," Jake replied quietly. The command center fell silent. Everyone understood what he was suggesting. They could overload the Defiant's reactor, creating an explosion large enough to destroy both ships. It would break the ambush, save the fleet, and kill everyone still aboard the Defiant. "Vakrian forces are evacuating," someone reported. "All Vakrian personnel are moving to escape pods." This was standard protocol. Zekthor should be doing the same. There was no logical reason to stay. The ship was lost. Dying achieved nothing. "All human personnel," Jake said over the ship-wide channel. His voice was steady and calm. "We have a choice to make. We can evacuate and let the swarm command ship survive, which means they continue coordinating the ambush and more of our fleet dies. Or we stay, overload the reactor, and take that command ship with us when we go." He paused. Zekthor could hear weapon fire in the background, getting closer. "I'm not ordering anyone to stay. This is volunteer only. If you want to reach the escape pods, go now. No judgment, no shame. But if you're willing to stay and finish this, we need to hold the swarm inside the ship long enough to complete the reactor overload. Engineering team needs 15 minutes. "That's a suicide mission," someone said over the channel. "Yes," Jake agreed. "It is." Zekthor expected panic, expected humans to rush for the escape pods. Instead, he heard Danny's voice, weak from his recent injuries but determined. "My squad's in. We'll hold the reactor room entrance." "Medical team staying," Karen said. "We have wounded who can't be moved." One by one, voices reported in. Pilots, engineers, soldiers, support staff. Not everyone stayed. Some rushed toward escape pods and no one blamed them. But most chose to remain. Zekthor watched Jake give orders, coordinating the defense with the same calm he showed in every battle. The commander was sending his people to their deaths and doing it with kindness and clarity. "Zekthor," Jake said, noticing him, "you should evacuate. This isn't your fight." Zekthor looked at the tactical display. He saw the escape pod bays still accessible. He could reach them. He could survive. He thought about everything he had learned, about Danny diving on an explosive for him, about Amy holding the line alone, about humans fighting despite terror because some things mattered more than survival. "I will reach the escape pods," Zekthor heard himself say. Jake nodded. "Go now, while you still can. And thank you for fighting beside us." Zekthor left the command center. He moved through corridors filled with sounds of battle. Human soldiers fought the swarm at every intersection, giving ground slowly, making them pay for every meter. He reached the escape pod bay. It was nearly empty now. A few humans were still evacuating, but most had stayed behind. Zekthor stepped toward a pod, his hand reaching for the door control. Through the window, he could see monitoring screens showing different parts of the ship. One screen showed Danny's position at the reactor room entrance. The young sergeant was barely healed from his last injury, but he fought anyway. His squad held the narrow corridor, preventing swarm warriors from reaching the engineering team. Another screen showed Karen treating wounded soldiers under fire. She worked calmly, efficiently, even as swarm warriors tried to reach her position. A third screen showed Jake in the command center, weapon in hand, organizing the final defense while the reactor overload sequence counted down. 12 minutes remaining. Zekthor's hand froze on the escape pod control. All his training said to leave. All his instincts said to survive. Every tactical principle he had learned said dying here was pointless, wasteful, meaningless. But he remembered Danny saying, "You're part of the squad now." He remembered Jake explaining that being human meant choosing to act despite fear. He remembered Chris saying that courage required fear. For the first time in his life, Zekthor felt true terror. His hands shook. His heart pounded in his chest. His breath came in short gasps. Every part of his body screamed at him to enter the pod and escape. The Vacrian discipline that had controlled his emotions for decades crumbled like dust. He was afraid, genuinely, completely, overwhelmingly afraid. And in that moment of pure terror, Zekthor understood. This was what humans felt every time they fought, this crushing fear, this desperate need to survive. And they chose to fight anyway. His hand moved away from the escape pod control. Zekthor turned around and ran back into the ship. He found Danny's position. The corridor was filled with swarm bodies, but more kept coming. Danny's squad was down to 4 soldiers, all wounded, all exhausted. They would not last much longer. "What are you doing here?" Danny shouted when he saw Zekthor. "You're supposed to evacuate." "I am part of the squad," Zekthor said, taking position beside him. His voice shook. His hands still trembled. "I will not leave." Danny's tired face split into a wide smile. "Well, all right then. Welcome to the party." They fought together, human and Vacrian side by side. Zekthor had never experienced combat like this. Before, battle had been cold calculation, disciplined precision. Now it was raw and desperate and terrifying. He missed shots he should have made. His hands shook too much. Fear kept trying to overwhelm him, telling him to run, to hide, to save himself. But he kept fighting. 2 minutes, Jake's voice came over communication. "All personnel! Emergency transport in 2 minutes. Another ship got close enough for transporter range. We're getting you out." "Copy that," Danny said. "Hear that, everybody? We just need to hold 2 more minutes." 2 minutes. Zekthor could do that. Even terrified, even shaking, he could hold for 2 more minutes. The swarm seemed to know their time was running out. They pushed harder, coming in waves. Amy fell, wounded. Karen grabbed her and dragged her back while still firing. Danny took a hit but kept fighting. Zekthor lost track of time. His world narrowed to firing, moving, fighting. Terror and determination mixed until he could not tell them apart. "Transport in 10 seconds, Jake said. "It's been an honor serving with all of you." Light filled the corridor. Zekthor felt the strange sensation of transporters pulling him apart and reassembling him somewhere else. When his vision cleared, he was on another ship, safe. Around him, human soldiers appeared, materializing one by one. Through the window, he saw the Defiant. The reactor overload reached critical point. The explosion was massive, brilliant, consuming both the Defiant and the swarm command ship attached to it. The humans cheered weakly. They had won. The ambush was broken. The fleet would survive. Zekthor collapsed to the floor, his body shaking uncontrollably. He had never been so afraid in his life. Even now, safe, the terror remained. Danny sat down beside him, wounded and exhausted, but smiling. "You came back," the sergeant said. "You didn't have to, but you came back." "I was terrified," Zekthor admitted. "I still am." "Yeah," Danny said. "That's how it feels. Welcome to being human." Zekthor woke in medical bay 3 days after the battle. His body had been exhausted beyond anything he had experienced before. Not from physical injury, but from the emotional toll of true fear. Karen sat beside his bed, checking medical readings. When she saw he was awake, she smiled. "Welcome back. You've been sleeping for almost 70 hours. "The others?" Zekthor asked. "Most survived. Danny's recovering down the hall. Amy will be back on duty next week." She paused. "We lost 38 people. Could have been everyone if we had stayed on the Defiant. 38 dead, but hundreds saved." The humans saw this as victory. Zekthor was beginning to understand why. "There's someone here to see you," Karen said. Commander Jake Morrison entered, carrying something in his hands. He approached Zekthor's bed and held out a small metal object. It was a medal, human military decoration for valor. "This is for you," Jake said. "For actions above and beyond duty. For choosing to stand with us when you could have escaped." Zekthor looked at the medal. Part of him wanted to accept it, to feel pride in what he had done. But another part, the honest part, could not. "I cannot accept this," he said quietly. "I was terrified the entire time. I shook. I missed shots. I nearly broke and ran a dozen times." "I know," Jake said. "That's exactly why you earned it." Zekthor stared at him, not understanding. Jake sat down in the chair Karen had vacated. "Do you know why humans give medals for courage? It's not for being unafraid. It's for being terrified and staying anyway. Every person who receives this award was scared. If they weren't, what they did wouldn't be brave. It would just be easy." He placed the medal on the table beside Zekthor's bed. "You felt real fear, maybe for the first time in your life, and you chose to act despite it. That's the hardest thing any warrior can do." After Jake left, Zekthor held the medal, thinking about his words. He had believed courage meant having no fear. But humans understood something deeper. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to act when fear screamed at you to run. Days passed. The fleet regrouped. The loss of the Defiant hurt, but the destruction of the Swarm command ship had been worth the cost. The ambush failed, and the Swarm lost coordination in the sector. Zekthor spent his recovery time thinking about everything he had experienced. He had come to humanity believing they were weak and undisciplined. He had been completely wrong. Humans were not weak. They were the opposite. They were so strong that they could acknowledge their weakness and continue anyway. One evening, Jake found him in the observation deck again. The commander had become something close to a friend, though Zekthor was still learning what friendship meant. "I need to understand something," Zekthor said. "Why do humans fight this way? Other species flee when survival instinct demands it, but humans override that instinct. How?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. "I think it's because we've always been afraid. From the beginning of human history, we've been small and vulnerable. Other predators were stronger, faster, had better weapons than our bodies. We should have gone extinct 100 times over." He turned to look at Zekthor. "But we learned something. We learned that being afraid doesn't mean you lose. It means you have a choice. You can let fear control you, or you can control fear. Every human who has ever done something brave was at war with themselves first, with the enemy second, and we got good at winning both wars." "But why?" Zekthor pressed. "Why fight the fear? Why not simply follow instinct and survive?" "Because survival isn't enough for us," Jake said simply. "We want to live with meaning. We want to believe our lives matter. and the only way to prove that is to risk those lives for something bigger than ourselves. Zekthor thought about the colonists on Theta 7, saved because humans refused to retreat. He thought about the fleet saved because humans chose to sacrifice themselves. Every human victory came at terrible cost, but they paid it willingly. I have fought alongside the greatest warriors in the galaxy, Zekthor said slowly, choosing his words carefully. Vakrians who trained their entire lives for combat. Soldiers who could fight for days without rest. Species stronger and faster than humans will ever be. He paused, watching Jake's reflection in the window. But none of them terrify me the way humans do. Jake raised an eyebrow. Should I be offended or flattered? Flattered, Zekthor said. I finally understand what makes humanity dangerous. It is not your weapons or tactics. It is not your numbers or technology. It is that you feel fear more deeply than any species I have known, and yet you are the only ones who routinely charge straight toward it. You make us sound crazy, Jake said with a slight smile. Perhaps you are, Zekthor admitted. But it is effective. A warrior without fear cannot be brave. They simply do not understand the cost of their actions. But a warrior who knows fear, who experiences it fully and completely, and then chooses to act anyway, that is something else entirely. He stood and faced Jake directly. That is terrifying. Jake extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. Zekthor gripped it, understanding the meaning now. It was not just greeting. It was connection, acknowledgement of shared experience. I need to request something, Zekthor said. I wish to remain with human forces permanently. Not as liaison, but as part of your military. You sure about that? Jake asked. It means a lot of fear, a lot of difficult choices. I know, Zekthor said, and I am still afraid. My hands still shake before battle. My heart still pound. The terror has not left me. He thought about Danny smiling even when injured, about Amy standing alone against impossible odds, about Karen treating wounded while under fire. But I have learned that fear is not weakness. Fear is the price of courage. And if I must pay that price to stand beside those who taught me what courage truly means, then I will pay it gladly. Jake smiled and nodded. Welcome to the team. Weeks later, Zekthor stood in a briefing room with Danny's squad. They were preparing for another mission, another battle against the swarm. The tactical situation was dangerous, the odds not favorable. Zekthor felt the familiar fear rising in his chest. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his weapons. His breathing quickened. Every instinct told him this was dangerous, that he could die. But around him, the humans prepared with steady focus, not because they were unafraid, but because they had learned to act despite fear. Danny caught his eye and nodded, that same smile on his face. Amy made a joke that made everyone laugh nervously. Karen said a quiet prayer. All right, people, Jake said. Let's review the mission one more time. As Jake spoke, Zekthor listened and prepared. The fear was still there, would always be there. But he understood now what humans had known for thousands of years. Fear was not the enemy. Fear was the proof that what you were doing mattered enough to be afraid of losing. When the briefing ended and they moved to the transport ships, Zekthor walked beside his squad. His squad now, not just humans, he observed. They were his companions, his friends, his fellow warriors. You ready for this? Danny asked as they boarded the ship. Zekthor felt his heart pounding, felt his hands shaking, felt the weight of fear pressing down on him like a physical thing. He was more afraid than he had ever been in his life. Yes, he said. I am ready. And he was. Not because the fear had gone away, but because he had finally learned what it meant to be brave. True courage was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to act when every part of you screamed to run. The transport ship launched, carrying them toward another battle. Zekthor sat with his squad, feeling the familiar terror rising. But alongside the terror was something else: pride, purpose, the knowledge that he was fighting beside beings who had mastered the hardest skill any warrior could learn. They had taught him that fear could be transformed into strength, that terror could become courage, that the most terrifying thing in the galaxy was not a warrior with no fear, but a warrior who was afraid and fought anyway. True fear had found him when he fought alongside humanity, but it had also taught him something invaluable. Fear was not the end of courage. It was the beginning. As the ship entered combat zone and alarms began to sound, Zekthor gripped his weapon with shaking hands and prepared to do what humans had done throughout their history. He prepared to be afraid and act anyway. He prepared to be brave. And in that moment, surrounded by humans who faced the same fear and made the same choice, Zekthor finally understood what it meant to be truly strong. The battle began, and Zekthor charged forward alongside his squad, his fear and courage inseparable, his terror transformed into something powerful and beautiful and utterly human. He was no longer just a Vakrian warrior observing humans. He had become something more.